Hey, good morning, everybody. Scott Luton and special guest host Dan Reeve with you here on Veteran Voices. Welcome to today's show. Dan, how you doing?
Well, good. Just had some time off in the mountains with my man Rob here, who's over from the UK. So life is good.
Life is good. I can't wait to dive into Rob's story. And by the way, I love your you got snow on these gorgeous looking like pine trees. What you got some wonderful shots behind you.
Cold.
It's cold.
It's actually in the mountains last night. We came down through an immersion. It was a lot, 10 degrees warmer, 15 degrees warmer. That's Fahrenheit, not real money. So it was a lot warmer up there in the mountains than it is right now down here in Denver. Yeah.
Well, I love the shots behind you. So we'll have to see if we see some grizzly bears or some snow rabbits or something. We'll see what kind of wildlife might might move behind you as we go through today's outstanding conversation with a wonderful fellow Royal Army, Royal Engineers, British Army, Royal Engineers veteran that you served with, right, Dan?
Yeah, Rob and I were in the same troop. Can't say we always liked each other at first, but we came to work together, learn to appreciate one another. Rob was actually my best man at my wedding, so
Really?
The army sort of threw us together, forced us to figure it out, and we did in the end. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna dive into that story on today's
Right.
episode of Veteran Voices. But hey, before we do, so listeners, stay tuned for a great conversation. But quick program note before we get started. Hey, this program is part of our Supply Chain Now family of programming. Today's show is conducted in partnership with our friends at Vets 2 Industry. You can learn more about this powerful nonprofit that's serving so many folks, so many veterans and their families at vets2industry.org. Okay. So with no further ado, Dan's been speaking about our guest today as if he's not even in the same room with him, and he is. This will be the first time we're interviewing a couple of veterans that served together on the same show. So really excited about today's conversation. Let's welcome in Rob Chell, veteran, again, of the Royal Engineers, which is a corps within the British Army. Rob, how you doing?
Good afternoon, Scott. Very well, thank you.
It is so neat to hear to meet you. I guess the 2022 version of meeting, because I don't know, Rob, if you know this or not, but your ears have been burning because on a couple of Dan's appearances with us, Dan, I believe you've referenced Rob a couple times, right?
It didn't sound good, but maybe. Yeah.
You didn't notify me of that.
All right. So let's get an opportunity to get to know Rob Chell a little bit better. So Rob, let's start with the universal question that drives so many conversations here. Where did you grow up, and give us a few anecdotes about your upbringing?
Well, I grew up, I suppose, mainly in Derbyshire, which is in the middle of Britain, pretty much, countryside. And I probably spent most of my time outside rather than inside, sort of watching television or playing board games.
Okay. What was your favorite thing to do outside?
What, as a child or as a sort of a teenager?
We'll do both. Let's do both.
I think it's just exploring, sort of adventure, sort of just climbing things, just being quite physical, but outside,
right?
Really. And I was aware when I was a youngster, I was aware that, although I had friends that did that with me, that a lot of children of my age, back then, spent a lot of time inside the house rather than outside. And of course, I was encouraged by my father to spend as much time outside as well. Probably just to give him a break.
Were you so? I don't know about y'all, but when I was growing up as a kid, and Dan, I'd love to get your take too. We loved a good old fashioned dirt bomb war, right? So I grew up in South Carolina. We had a lot of clay, and especially after a rain, you'd have all these dirt bombs, and we would have the best time hitting each other with these clumps of clay. Does that ring a bell for your upbringing, Rob?
Oh, we did when I was in the Scouts. We did bags of flour. You'd have flour wars at night.
What, with the permission of the elders, or?
Yeah, it was like an organised sort of ambush. Two sides would go at each other with. And that was kind of before the days of paintball and laser tag and all that stuff. That the scouts would camp out.
Over Norwich way.
Yeah, it was in Norfolk.
Yeah, probably a Norfolk thing.
Bags of flour. Is that what you said, Dan?
Yeah, like little bags, of flour. You throw them at each other, and it.
I love it.
Come away fairly white.
I suppose we made water bombs out of folding bits of paper up.
Okay.
Because that's the nearest thing. But
hey, different strokes, different folks. Whatever it takes to help fuel your fight against your friends as you're outside enjoying the outdoors, growing up. What else, Dan? You're going to ask Rob about what made him join the Army here in just a second. But what else sticks out? Let's talk about food for a second. Derbyshire, is that where you grew up again, Rob?
Pretty much in Derbyshire, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was a go-to food dish that your folks would make that you might miss about your childhood?
I suppose that's difficult to answer because my mum was quite a good cook, so pretty much all the food was good. I don't really know. I can't think of anything that was in particular that I really liked. I suppose stews. Stews and pies.
Okay.
Chips or fries. You call chips fries over here, don't you?
Yeah.
French fries. So that sort of thing was pretty good. Roast beef.
Roast beef. One last thing. One last question. Did you grow up a sports fan? Did you follow any teams as a kid?
No.
No. Really? So it was outside exploring the outdoors at your dad's behest, it sounds like.
Yeah. I couldn't stand sport.
You must have got into shooting quite early.
I went shooting with my father probably less than 10 years old. I was probably shooting with him.
But when I say shooting, I assume that what you mean is it more like in the UK, game hunting, birds, rabbit, fox?
Yeah, I guess it started off with going out with him shooting. My grandmother had lived in Wales in the valleys in Wales, and she had a small house but with some land, so we used to walk around the fields, shoot a rabbit, bring it back, paunch it,
really,
gut it, and then cook it up for dinner.
Okay, so here in the States we call that hunting, and it sounds like you were hunting at an early age, or shooting, as it might be how y'all refer to it there.
Yes, yeah. Going. I suppose we call it rough shooting. I think we refer to it as rough shooting. Yeah.
And you still enjoy it to this day?
Well, I'm not against it, but I do a lot less of it than what I did when I was younger. Yes,
I got you.
Yeah. I think when I was younger, I really enjoyed doing it with my father, and then I went on in my teens and my 20s doing that. Yep. And then I guess something changed, and I don't know if it's just the process of getting older, but something changed inside, and I started perhaps where you used to observe the behavior of these animals,
right?
And I suppose now I sort of appreciate the animals in a different way. So I just observe them and then leave them be.
Hey, I'm with you, Rob. I'm with you. We could have a fuller conversation around that. In particular, I'm a big bird fan. Right outside my home studio here, I've set some pole feeders up, and it is amazing how much more I've appreciated blue jays and bluebirds and cardinals and goldfinches. And it really, to kind of to your point, but I'm gonna use a different word. It's mesmerizing. When I've got 20 birds, especially when the sunlight hits these things at a certain time in the morning and then in the afternoon, it is absolutely mesmerizing to see these birds feed and interact and stuff. But we'll have you back on the bird podcast maybe next time you come, Rob. So Dan, we want to get into kind of how y'all served together, and you both wore uniforms. So where do we want to start? What do you want to ask Rob next?
Well, it's funny I asked Rob this question just yesterday, and we were discussing, Rob, we were talking about how we both ended up in 3 Troop 575 Field Squadron, 73 Engineer Regiment. That was effectively, for the American listeners, it was a National Guard regiment. They didn't call it National Guard in the UK, they called it the Territorial Army. Well, most people assume the Territorial Army didn't deploy. Well, in 2003, and actually in the Falklands, they proved that was not the case. You know, if the Army needs battle casualties and reserves, you're going to.
And also the TA, and I think it's greater now, but the TA certainly back then made up 1/3 of the armed forces on operations, didn't they?
Right, but I think the public and many didn't, certainly when I deployed, even Esker, they were a little surprised, very supportive. I've got to say that about Esker, very supportive of my deployment. You know, I came back from deployment and Esker said, "Oh, by the way, you know, you've got 4 weeks vacation to have." Well, that's 6 months, 7 months away. No, we think this is really important. You've earned it. Go and have your vacation. Okay, thanks very much. And when you get that sort of support from an employer, it's fantastic. But the question for you, Rob, really,
and Dan, hey, one quick thing. I just want to level set for the handful of listeners that may have missed your earlier appearances. When you say Esker, you're talking about the worldwide technology firm that you work with and work for, right?
Indeed. I'm talking about Esker, where the company is a global organization, 1,000 employees across 13, 14 locations around the world. And I joined Esker very young. I think I was 21, and probably, let's think, I was deployed in 2003, so 19. I've been there 4, 5, 6 years.
Okay, and they're really supportive, and it sounds like y'all. I know you want to ask Rob this question, but really one quick follow up. I think Esker continues to invest in its veteran team members and recruit veterans, and which we can't get enough of companies that really deliberately bake it into their strategy of finding veterans and giving them great job opportunities. So love to hear that aspect of the Esker culture.
There's a reason for it. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean just because somebody's a veteran, well, that person automatically gets the job. What it means is, you know, if we think about our criteria, skills, experience, attitude, results, cognitive skills, and the habits, we call it the search criteria. Often what we're looking for are they self-starters? Can they keep going through tough times? Will they study and apply themselves? Will they ask for help? Do they have grit? And sometimes folks have said to me, Dan, you know, what you look for is just these athletes in Colorado who like to ski, climb, and do the stuff that you do. That's not true. You know, what we care about is folks that can be humble, can listen, can learn, can work, and apply themselves. And we found veterans across. We have junior positions in the company in sales, the sales development staff. We have 2 Air Force veterans there. We've had veterans in our IT group, information technology. One of the leaders within the sales team, a gentleman called Chris Wadley, we give him a hard time because he was in the Air Force like yourself. And whenever we go backcountry fly fishing, I offer if I should, you know, make his bed and put a tent up. So we have another one of our sales leaders is a former naval chap, U.S. Navy, served on I think just he served in the carrier battle group, and he was a swimmer. So we see that the veterans often bring experience, drive, tenacity, the ability to play nice in the sandpit with other people.
Love it. I agree with you. I think it's a win-win all the way around. So I love that element, and I'm glad we brought that up today. So bringing it full circle, perhaps let's talk about Rob. What made you join the Army, right, Dan? That's the burning question, right?
Yeah. What made you join the Army? How did you land in 3 troop, R troop? How did I get so unlucky? What happened? How did you end up there? You know.
Well, we're both unlucky. I think really it started off was when I was going through teenager. I mentioned earlier that, you know, I spent a lot of time outside shooting, just, you know, climbing, exploring in the countryside. And then as I was just at the beginning of my 20s, I realised that a number of things. I realised that a lot of my friends didn't want to do any of that. So if I did it, I either did it by myself or just with one or two other friends. And the more I immersed myself in the countryside in my early 20s, I realised that I had less and less people that were interested in doing that. So that was one reason. There was another reason. My grandfather and my father and various other members of the family were in the armed forces.
Legacy.
I think, yeah, and I think that's a thing for quite a lot of people, that when their parents or other members of the family are in the forces, they sort of have an interest and want to join. And my thirst for adventure and sort of a sense of hardship, because adventure is, when you're doing things that's adventurous, it is hard mentally and physically. So I think my thirst for that was there, and I think I'd started sort of perhaps the journey of trying to discover sort of, I don't know, who you are or what makes you tick, or that sort of thing. So they were really the driving points, really.
Yep.
So I think there was one more.
Sure.
I felt that I was very shy. So I remember being, if I was in a group of people, I felt that I was quite shy compared to the other people in the group. And I thought, well, the army is going to beat that out of me. So I think that was really more or less the reasons.
So if I heard you correctly, you were in your early 20s when you joined the British Army, is that right?
Yeah, I think I was 20. It's a long time ago now, so do forgive me, but I think I was 23, 22, 23, something like that, I think.
Okay. So you joined the British Army, and then talk to us about how you determined what you were going to do and what you did and where you went.
Well, the first thing to do is you always interview, interview whatever you're going to go into. So instead of just joining the British Army, I went and interviewed a load of different cap badges.
That'll be units. We
Okay.
refer to cap badge as like it's a shortened form of saying this unit or that unit, because each unit, just like the US, different regiments, corps, battalions. Well, not like battalions, but different regiments and corps will have a different beret or a different cap badge.
And they'll have, you'll have logistics or a group within the army that drive lorries and distribute materials and goods and stuff, and you'll have another unit that'll do something else. So I interviewed, I think it was, in fact I was saying to you yesterday, wasn't I? I interviewed the Staffords that were at the time were a recce platoon.
So that's infantry. Yeah.
And they were the ones I wanted to join all along. I felt that my skills of spending most of my life in the countryside would sort of suit that sort of unit really well. So I interviewed them, and then I interviewed the medics.
So that's
paramedics.
Yeah, that would be
Airborne.
Airborne, which would be a division of the parachute regiment.
Okay.
It was
I don't know.
I forget, but yeah, the airborne para. Yeah.
So Rob,
yeah.
what I'm hearing you interviewed with all the toughest units. Sounds like to me of the British Army. You weren't messing around. You were ready to see some action, is what I'm hearing.
I guess so, but I guess that you want to go in knowing what those units can sort of offer you and what you can offer them. So I did. The other two were logistics, which are, delivering and picking up materials and things like that. And then what was another one? But yeah, and then I wanted to do the recce platoon, but they were changing. They were just about to change to SF, which is sustained fire, which is operating with machine guns, that sort of thing. And that I didn't feel that sounded pretty boring, so I decided to dip out on that. And then, I went to the Royal Engineers, which happened to be fairly local to me, and they seemed to interview quite well. So I just thought, well, I'll give them a shot.
So the Royal Engineers is what it was. That was going to be your cap badge, if I heard that right.
Badge.
Okay. So, and that's where you met Dan. Is that right?
Very, very shortly after, joining, I met Dan. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we took I don't know why, but we did take an instant dislike to each other.
Yeah.
Why? All right. So for our listeners, I've heard a little bit of this story, Dan, but why didn't y'all like each other?
I guess you were quite bossy, weren't you?
Yeah, I think I was young. I given a little bit of rank. I was a section leader effectively, and I'd been in the unit 2 or 3 years before, and I joined. I think I was the youngest corporal in that regiment to be promoted. I was very young, and maybe I was a bit full of myself. And I think also Rob came in. We talk about Rob's experience with Land Rovers and improvising and adapting as a farm boy. Effectively, I was a city slicker, and I think perhaps I thought I knew it all. I knew enough, and I've been in this regiment longer than 2 or 3 years longer than Rob. And Rob came in with probably some smart ideas and some pause as to, is this the right way to do it, or maybe there's another way of looking at this. And I think it was only when we got sort of forced to work together on a survival exercise that we realised, maybe he's all right after all.
And I think that's true. What Dan has said, that he was very irritating. But I think something that I had, which has to be voiced, is that I don't think I had a very good way of putting over maybe an idea or a thought. So I think partly I don't put all the blame at Dan's feet, but I think partly I was to blame as well, because I think that when I had a good idea, I knew it was going to be a good idea, but I didn't voice it or approach it correctly, which obviously irritated Dan, because I guess he felt undermined, or or perhaps even if you're given a situation and you don't really know quite what to do, you might feel a bit inadequate, especially if you are higher up the chain. You're sort of expected to know. And yeah, I think that we learned to sort of communicate better with each other and also others, and also not be quite so assuming that we both know the right.
Clearly, y'all bridged those divides because you went on to do some big things together. Dan, you were going to add something there.
No, I think the Army taught us, one of the things they stressed in the leadership training was, you don't have to know, even though sometimes, often in the Army, you were expected to, but you really, true leaders don't have to have all the right answers. What you want to do is be able to encourage your staff to have the freedom, the agility, and feel safe to suggest options. And then you say, great, keep going with that idea. Or that's a good idea, we're going to take it and adjust it slightly. And I think that's one of the things, I just finished reading a book called Multipliers. It's all about how you can get out of the way and support your staff and get up to 50% more productivity. And I realized a lot of it was back to that idea, which is you don't steal all the oxygen in the room. Yes, I've been guilty of that in my life. Have a couple of coins, but use less chips. It's almost like you sit at the poker table, I've only got a couple of chips. And as a leader, I need to let everybody else sort of maybe speak and contribute. And at the right time, I'll shape this. So I think I was mistaken going into the Army thinking that, yes, it's the sergeant major style of leadership that's important. Well, actually, what I think we both discovered from some very good man managers, including a great warrant officer in our who came and worked alongside us, is they listened, they understood you, and then they should sort of guided you and illustrated the way to go forward. And so I think great man management, it's not a case of it doesn't exist within the Army or the military forces. Often it does, and often some folks can take it and transition that into civilian street and very easily. Others, it can be more of a challenge. Yeah.
Agreed.
I guess it takes a while for that to bond. It's part of forming a team, I guess, that you sort of, for instance, what we were talking about earlier, that, you know, he was a section commander, I wasn't at the time, and you all bring to the table a wealth of knowledge, and you've got to work, or he's got to work out who has that knowledge and that understanding and ability, but also Dan's got to work out, you know, what the strengths and weaknesses are as well. And then as that sort of bond is forming, certain boundaries are broken down, and you learn perhaps how, or for me, how to put across a suggestion, so it sounds like a suggestion rather than dictatorship.
I think as you do things in the army, you go through tough things or tough times together, maybe trust develops. You're like, okay, that guy or girl was with me, it was cold, it was wet, it was dark, that was hard.
Right.
That person's always there when we do these things. Maybe sometimes, whether you like that person or not, a bond starts to develop because you're like, that person went through that. That person stuck it out.
Agreed.
That person has surprised me. I mean, wow. I mean, and I've seen that at Esker. There's been times when I remember working with somebody from a different country, and I caught my own bias. We were doing actually a command exercise in Lake Louise on the ice in Canada, and I remember thinking, my own bias is getting in the way, and I recognize, hang on a minute, this guy's pretty good.
Right.
But my bias is I can't really understand the chap because his language differential, just like you probably can't understand me because of my accent. But I realized, hang on, I'm guilty of being biased again.
Right.
And what I think the army did is often it shoved you together with people from all different walks of life, all different social, economic status.
The full spectrum. Really.
Oh, it was amazing. You know, people from not even in the mainland, and people from Jamaica or other parts of the Commonwealth, Australians, and you had to sort of look past that. I think there were times when you didn't even notice someone was a different colour,
right,
from a different region. Sure. They were wearing the same cap badge as you, or they were not. That's what you noticed. Yeah. Oh, he's from the Dragoon Guards. We don't see them very often. Or, you know, he's from the Airborne. Oh, right, well, cool. We don't get to work with those guys that often. So it wasn't really. It was, you know, I think you saw past those things that maybe, I don't know, people always see past them in civilian street. I don't know.
Agreed.
I think it's a great opportunity to be immersed with the full spectrum of society, because I think normally in society you stick within a certain sort of, I don't think it's a conscious thing, but a certain sort of, you know, band. You might, you know, go on the fringes of that, but you just stick within that sort of that area. But in the army, you definitely get thrown in amongst a full spectrum of individuals and experiences.
And that's a wonderful thing, as you are both attesting to. So let's talk. Give us an example. You know, time won't do it justice to kind of walk through probably all the things y'all did as part of the Rural Engineers, which, Dan, I think the nickname, the Sappers. Sappers, is that is that nickname for the Rural Engineers? Is that right?
Yeah, it comes from the First World War. So sappers were responsible for trench warfare, and well, not just trench warfare, but I think sap, pompier in French. Certainly, when you first join the Royal Engineers, you know, you're not known as a private or trooper. You're known as a sapper.
Right.
Then
gotcha.
you go on to become corporal, sergeant, etc.
Yeah. So Rob, give us an example of the work of a project y'all did together. What made up one of your projects, or deployments, or you name it?
Well,
what y'all do together?
We didn't often do stuff together, did we? We were on different sort of training exercises and things.
Yeah.
I mean, we did we down south. We put in or refurbished a shooting butt on a range, and it was really horrendous weather. It wasn't great, and it was very sort of flat, open ground next to the sea. So we were bombarded for about 3 days,
4 days
of
just
rain and wind. You know, horizontal rain. When it hits you, it's like needles. That was pretty taxing.
I literally just got off the plane. I'd been on the sales event in the Dominican Republic. Got dysentery. Got off the plane, sick as anything. Drove down there, and we just worked night and day, did this job. And I think, we didn't enjoy it at the time, but we also knew it was kind of amusing and funny that we just had to do it. We just got on with it.
Yeah.
So, and that was,
and we were meant to have a day R&R, but because of the weather, it was taking so long, so we ended up having to work our day of R&R. I seem to remember. So
we did deploy together. You asked about deployments, so both Rob and I, we did a lot of outdoor adventure. Rob spoke about that earlier. We went and did a 2-week trip to the mountaineering trip to the Pyrenees. We went to Nepal as a regiment, 3 or 4 weeks in Nepal.
4 weeks.
And we organised our own trip to climb Mont Blanc in France.
Right, yeah.
4 of us from our troop. So certainly the Army encouraged and fueled us to pursue that passion and that adventure and that planning and that self-reliance. And then there was a point when he and I were stood on a peak at the Annapurna circuit in Nepal. We were there with our regiment, and Rob says, this will come at a cost. They'll want something in return. This doesn't come for free. And sure enough, about 6 months later, we were stood in the desert in Ali Al Salem Air Base in northern Kuwait. So I told you. And sure enough, we were there. So we were deployed as part of Operation Telek, which was the British Army's contribution in 2003. This is where we separated, because Rob was sort of allocated to one squadron. Although we were in our reserve, our guard squadron was together.
Right.
We were in the same back home.
But we'd been pulled from different units.
They don't do that in America as much, I believe. So it's a different mantra.
I think the I may be wrong here, but I think the process at the time was that the British Army wanted certain expertise, and they looked at their system, computer system, no doubt, and worked out who had all these expertise that they wanted. So they drew on those. So we happened to be called up together, and we were with some other lads from the same troop as well as the same squadron and the same regiment. But then there was a whole host of other people from other units and cap badges and stuff all over the place, whether they were TA, reserves, retired. Well, reserves aren't retired, aren't they? So we were all pulled together, and then we did some pre-deployment training, and then we got kitted out with some kit, and then we flew out in a civilian plane, didn't we? Because I always thought, I don't know why, but I always thought we'd fly out on a C-130 and sort of touch down and jump out the back and ready to go. But we didn't. We flew out in a civilian plane.
Well, I think what was going on back then is they firstly thought the Royal Air Force had got to get us there. I subsequently spoke to my friend who was a staff sergeant in the Commando Logistic Brigade. He said, no, it just means you guys weren't important enough on the tasking order. He said, so, and on top of that, I think what happened is we got there, and this is why I think there is, it may have changed, but there was a fundamental difference. Traditionally, I believe the National Guard, or the Army Reserve in America, mobilizes and deploys as a unit.
Right.
But the Brits, I think they're changing this now. The Brits have typically been, you train in your local squadron troop, and when you go to war, we're just going to sprinkle you across these regiments. So the regiment will go to 110 or 115% of normal strength, because you are basically a battle casualty reserve, and your job is to help us plug holes. And so that was, for me, that was a bit frustrating, because we had always trained together for years and years and years. Yet and when we went over there, we lost some of that cohesion, that trust, that experience. I think Rob had a different experience, where Rob, coming from, Rob obviously runs a construction business in his normal civilian life. He had all that experience as improvising and adapting as a farmer. And suddenly they've got a pipeline to build in southern Iraq. And so Rob looks at it with a different set of eyes to the regular active duty soldiers and says, there's an easier way, a more efficient way for us to accomplish this task. Let me show you how.
Yeah, so once we'd landed in Kuwait, we were on the airbase, and we sort of got, you have to sign in to the theatre of war, just let them know that you're there. And then we we got separated then, and then I was put with a unit. So I was attached for the pretty much the whole period. I was attached to 40 and 42 Royal Marine Commandos, and so I left this airbase in QO, went over the border, and then joined or attached to this unit, and then we were tasked. The first job we were tasked with was to put a water distribution point in. So the unit I'd been attached to broken down. So one section did the pump house, one section did water purification. My section that I was attached to did the pipeline, which was 2.2 kilometers long, and then another section did the water distribution point, which is basically taps. And
that's forced for you, just to, you know.
So we were.
Or spigots in the South. Spigots is what we'd call that in the South there, Dan.
So then I was sent out in a rover to join my section, and they'd been out there, I think, pretty much most of the morning. Anyway, I sort of jumped out the back of the rover, Land Rover, and I didn't really know, because there was no one to introduce me to them. I didn't really know what I'm really supposed to do. And some of the communication issues that we had in the early years sort of, came to my mind, and I thought, well, I'll approach it in a similar sort of manner. So walked over there and introduced myself to them, and they'd been there for several hours trying to put this pipeline together, push fit pipe basically to start with, and they weren't getting on very well. I think the temperature was when we first got out there was about 48 Celsius. It went up to 52 Celsius, I think, in the end. And I was standing there talking to the section commander, and I knew how they could sort of speed up this process a lot quicker. But I knew that if I was going to offer any sort of suggestions, I had to do it in a very careful manner, not to stand on anyone's feet. So thinking back to the issues that Dan and I had together, I suggested to the section commander that I might have some ideas that might speed up the process, and which I suggested to him, and he went away, came back with all this stuff that we needed, and yeah, the pipeline started going in a lot quicker. And I think my experience of my whole journey in the theatre of war with that unit, I think that I just hit it off with them straight away, and I was able just to suggest something that was credible, important, made life easier for everyone. Then I think I was just on a roll there from then onwards.
Well, so really quick for our listeners, 52 degrees Celsius is 125.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was hot. And I've been to Kuwait. I had one TDY in the Air Force. It was 45 days at Al Jabbar Air Base in Kuwait, which is no longer around, I don't think. Dan and Rob, I think they shut that. At least I don't think the U.S. has a presence there anymore, if I'm not mistaken.
I stole about 20 chocolate Magnum ice creams from the DFAC there. We kept going in there, and they didn't know who we were. There was 7, 8 Brits on site stripping out the airfield of all the British hardened aircraft shelters and munitions, and we went in there every day. And basically, we couldn't believe the Americans were giving out Magnum ice creams, so we went back for seconds and thirds every day.
Well,
they were like, "Wow, you really like these ice creams?" And our reply was, "Your army or your military is really good at morale.
Right.
Ours is not. So we're going to keep coming back."
They even had McDonald's out there, didn't they?
Pizza
we had.
Hut.
Hey, those 45 days we ate great. We had lobsters and steak every Thursday night in the chow hall there, as I recall. But one of the things you reminded me, Dan and Rob, I'm not sure if you ever spent a little time at Al Jabbar. We were able to tour the actual we went beyond just the American installation, which is really pretty small, and we toured the hardened aircraft bunkers that the French sold to the Kuwaiti government in the 80s. And they were sold, the French sold these hardened shelters that they were indestructible. And it was so cool to be able to go into those things. I still have some old Polaroid pictures of where bunker busters, because Saddam used those hardened shelters to hide aircraft, but our munitions, the coalition munitions, were able to bust through those things. They were big old holes. You see all the rebar hanging down because the aircraft Saddam Hussein hid in there were not hidden for long. So it was really cool.
The story goes further. The story goes further. When I was at Ali Al Salem, which is just north of there was this fleet of Mirage fighter jets in disrepair. And I'm thinking, this is a very expensive fleet of equipment to have just rotting or in disrepair. I don't understand this. And then I found the story was because the French, the Kuwaiti said to the French, those hardened aircraft shelters you sold us were subpar. The Americans have proved their F-15s and their Paveway 2 laser-guided bombs.
Right.
So we're not going to pay you all the money we owe you. And then apparently the rumor is, the French said, well, we're not going to send you any more spare parts or maintain those fighter jets if you're not going to play ball and pay us for the hangars. I don't know. 3 sides to every story, but that's what I heard.
I love that.
I'm
gonna start adding that element, your story, to as I talk about those hardened shelters. Hey, the business of military financing and equipment and fleet maintenance. All right, so we're gonna talk.
Don't forget you work for a French company.
I know.
We're gonna talk about Rob's transition in just a minute, but one final question before Dan, you ask him about that. Communication and communication skills is certainly one of the themes thus far as we are halfway through our conversation here today. And Rob, that strikes me as one of the key skills you developed in the Royal Army with the British Army with the Royal Engineers. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I think it teaches you to get on with a whole spectrum of people, and I think generally speaking, if you upset someone in the army, you generally know about it one way or another. It's never really very pleasant, and you have to hone your skills, quickly to get on with it, and then through your normal training as a basic soldier or going on to being section commander, it's explained to you how to communicate clearly and precisely and not put a lot of waffle in your communication, which can sometimes mislead people, or the attention span starts going and they're not listening to you. So yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. I agree with you. All right. So Dan, we love talking transition around here, and we certainly want to learn more about Rob's transition, right?
Yeah, I think the transition question is interesting, Rob, because you and I believe that our transition, and like many in the National Guard in the US Reserves will understand, our transition, we went through, I believe, transitions almost every weekend, every drill period, every Wednesday night, every fortnight, and all the extra duties we did. And we would have a period where we'd go back to the civilian world and you were running your own business. So how did that transition work? And I do believe the transition when we came back from Iraq was a bit harder. I remember worrying, will I even remember how this software operates? Will I even remember how to engage with clients and customers and sell software? I was worried. This was just head trash. And over time, it did come back. Over time, I had to change my attitude. And what about you? How was your transition?
Coming back from Iraq?
Yeah.
Well, I thought that so to start with, I was out in the theatre of war, and it had just changed actually. It had gone from a war state or liberation state to whatever the state is after.
Peacekeeping, I guess.
Peacekeeping,
yeah.
which is often more dangerous than the war state, because traditionally in war you know where the enemy is. but afterwards they can start sort of outflanking you,
And they all took off the uniforms.
and they take off the uniforms, and there's IEDs, and well, there's IEDs anyway. But it starts getting more complicated, and you know, instead of it being quite a clear picture in front of you, you really have to be, you know, on your rear guard. So I was there for pretty much the full 6 months, right to the end, and then I think a few weeks after the end of the war phase, and then I was sent back to the UK. And so I was basically, as I see it now, I was plucked out of a theatre of war and then put on Civvy Street within about 16 hours. I think that was it, time-wise. And we'd been working or operating sort of, your normal sort of working day would be 18 to 20-hour days, and then the 4 hours, let's say you did 20 hours, your 4 hours wouldn't just be sleep. You do your admin, like cleaning weapons, sorting your kit out, sorting your food out, getting supplies, whatever it might be, and then whatever time's left over, you go to sleep. So I've gone from that, 16 hours later, I'm in Civvy Street, and I remember thinking to myself, almost like doing a self-check to see if I was, you know, physically all right, and mentally all right, or whatever. And I thought, well, I'm all right, I'm fine. And I think my first stop was to see my grandmother, because it was just on the natural course back to my home. And my grandmother lived opposite from my father. And when I got there, I had a quick chat with them, and they were about to go to the theatre. So my father asked me if I'd give my grandmother a lift to the theatre. So I gave her a lift to the theatre. And she was by herself because my father hadn't turned up with his friends. So I thought I'd go in. So I was just in, I don't normally wear this, but I was just in a t-shirt, tracksuit bottoms, and a pair of trainers, probably looking a bit scruffy, with my grandmother in, taking her to the theatre. So I went in, sat her down, and I went up to get a drink. And I felt that I was being ignored because everyone's in pretty much black tie, you know, formal dress, bow tie.
Right.
And I was at the bar, and it was my turn to take the order and to put my order in. And barman looked over the top of me and took the order from the guy behind me.
Mm.
And I swung round. I'm not proud of this, but I swung round. And as I was spinning round, I realised what I was about to do, and I managed to stop. I don't know if he knew what I was about to do, but I knew what I was about to do, and I managed to stop. And I eyeballed him, but I just turned around, placed my order, got my drinks, and then gave them to my grandmother. And I realised that it was probably going to take a bit of time to sort of settle down from that high state of alertness, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think it took, well, for me, I think 18 months to 2 years to just come down from that sort of just that state of alertness, you know. It's pretty hard.
And so naturally that made your transition as you were you know, finding employment and a job in the private sector, it made that more challenging.
I think actually, I think it probably didn't, because I think I used it as a like a medicine or sort of therapy to sort of take me away from what I'd been, if you like, subjected to, and just allowed me to focus on to something else. So I think I found it quite soothing and rewarding, and I was probably a bit too sort of addicted to it, really, because it sort of took you away from, you know, various thoughts and feelings and stuff.
I think when we went out, we didn't expect to come back with any baggage, so to speak. And I don't, personally, I feel I was very lucky, didn't get a scratch. Glad I went and did the tour. But I don't, in the way going out there, I don't think anybody ever said, and by the way, when you come back, I believe American units good at this, we're going to decompress for a month or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You won't immediately go back to your families.
I think, sorry about jumping in there, Dan. I think that, I don't know why we were just sent straight back, but I think very soon after that, that they did send guys over to places like, was it Azores, Ascension Isles, Cyprus, for I don't know, a couple of weeks or so to sort of depressurize. And although if I'd been given that opportunity to do that, I know that I wouldn't have wanted to do it. I mean, in the army, you don't often get given an opportunity, you're told what to do. But it was pretty harsh just to just come straight back, just plug straight out of that environment and just put into a completely other, different environment.
Which is funny because you've always heard stories about how during the Second World War, the First World War, people would be thrown back into the working environment in the UK, and society knew it didn't work, or he would never speak about his time in the service until just before he passed away. Or I think the British Army knew better in some ways, but for some reason it wasn't planned. And now I think with the recognition of PTSD, etc., I think the British Army and the US Army, the National Guard, are a lot better at looking out for it, recognizing it. I remember we were on a remembrance parade and we got back, and a friend said, I asked him how he was doing. He said, I'm struggling a bit, to be honest. And I said, why? And I don't think I should have investigated more. But we were talking about, again, he got separated in a different unit, and he said something like, on the first night I was going across the border, the Fedayeen, which was the local militia in southern Basra, were attacking our position, throwing kids 10, 11, 12 at us, carrying AKs. And he said, I had to, shoot a child carrying an AK. And it was only years later when I was living here in the US that I realized I'd failed him. I'd failed him to say, well, have you spoken to anybody? What are your thoughts? How are you doing with this? I think that was a cry for help, and I missed it, and I feel guilty about it. I should have said, well, should we do something about this? Do you want to have a chat? Should we get together for a coffee? And I didn't,
I think that
nobody trained us to look out for that.
I don't think you should feel guilty about that, because you're all going through your own journey, and I suspect that all of our journeys, even if you were fighting alongside each other, during that fight and after that fight, when you're thinking about it, I should think that your journey through that process is different from each other. Your thoughts, how you saw it from your side. You might be 2 meters away from me, but how you physically saw or think you saw the whole. So
your perceptions and those perceptions change over time.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
And it was probably, to be fair, I think it was y'all's first time, Dan, as a manager, even needing to be mindful of those. I mean, it was your first time, coming back from a war, and having to even worry about maybe the mental state of your troops. So, hindsight's always 20/20. War and deployment, and I've never served in combat. I'm not like y'all. I didn't deploy to Iraq or anything, so I can only put myself in those shoes. But it is such a complex thing on so many different levels, and I appreciate y'all sharing, because I think these conversations, I believe, are what is going to help the veteran community, tackle, unfortunately, whatever the next conflict looks like. The mental state.
Especially for the. I was say, Scott, sorry.
Yeah, no,
especially
go.
for the US military. I remember 2010. I was over here, and I was thinking, I was watching units get deployed, and individuals doing 5 tours. And I think when we were there, the 3rd Infantry Division, the 4th Infantry Division got extended to 18 months in theory. And on top of that, they've done 3 or 4 months pre-deployment. You're talking 2 years away from your family.
Right.
When we came back, children, I remember seeing, or certainly even when we were there, one of the roughest, toughest soldiers crying on the telephone, just destroyed. And I'm thinking, that guy's a real warrior. He's a Viking. And he was a friend of mine. I said, what's up, mate? He said, well, kids won't talk to me because they feel I abandoned them by coming out here. And it was hard to see that, and I think maybe, when you join up, nobody says this is some of the side effects that are going to happen. this is what you have to deal with.
I mean, I think I'm sure it's the same for the American Army, but for the British Army, I think they do a very good job in training you as a professional soldier. But I think they do a really bad job at sort of training you or helping you to understand what it might be like. You know, sort of, it's all right. You know what the warfare part of it's like, but there's a whole host of other things that take place. You know, like phoning if you get the chance of phoning home and speaking to your kids. I don't have children, but if you did, you know, they don't tell you or suggest how you might approach that or keep in touch with them. So yeah, they do a great job of training you to be a professional soldier, but a lousy job at outside that.
There's certainly opportunities to improve. So let's skip ahead for the sake of time. There's so much we could. I really appreciate y'all sharing and being really transparent about your experiences. Again, I think the more we talk, and I think use the example of the gentleman that was on the phone who's bawling, Dan. You know, the tough guys and getting them to talk about their experiences can be challenging to do. But the more we can talk about this as veterans, I think the more non-veterans and veteran advocates in our respective governments and branches of the military, the more understanding and hopefully the stronger the programming that supports our military and our men and women in uniform can be. So Rob, curious, what do you do now? Can you shed a little light on what you do now without not too many specifics, but what are you up to now?
So I run a joinery business, which does a bit of building as well, or construction basically, specialising in historical properties, maintaining them, alterations, repairs, that sort of thing, where pretty much everything has to be bespoke for that period of time. And that is pretty much what I do, which a lot of the skills that I use within that, either running the business or actually hands-on understanding and creating things. A lot of that skill comes from being in the army, being able to sort of identify where the problems are and how to correct them.
So provide the context. What are the age of the houses?
Well, they can be a good few hundred years old, maybe 200, 300, 400-year-old properties.
Wow.
Yeah, and so there was a property that, this isn't really to do with your question, but there's a property that I do a fair bit of work on, and which it's about 300 years old, and I was up on some scaffolding, removing a piece of stone from the wall because it deteriorated, and I just had a moment as I had it out of my hands, I was holding this bit of stone, and I was just thinking, the last time a human touched this bit of stone was about 300 years ago.
Wow.
And here I am, sort of 300 years later, taking this piece of stone out.
Man,
so
that is awesome.
And very rewarding.
Yeah, I bet it is. So let me ask you a quick follow-up. How did you, that seems to be a very niche part of the construction industry. How did you stumble into the historical property aspect of construction?
I found it quite difficult because there's no one, there's very few people that specialise in it. They may say they do, but they probably don't. And it took a long time to sort of get into that area. I'd gone through the normal courses of education in terms of building techniques and construction and drawing and stuff, which, as far as I was concerned, that gave me the foundation work to build on for that. But the rest of it was just trying to get hold of information books, detailed books on historical properties and how the techniques were used back in the day. And then over a long time, you meet someone and then they put you in touch with someone else,
Right.
and then it starts growing quite quickly once you sort of, you know, you get into that sort of environment. But that environment is still, you know, it's very, very small. You know, even in the whole of Britain, there's not a huge amount of people that specialise in historical properties. So you'll be working on one job, and you'll be talking to someone else on that job that might be a plasterer, and they'd been a few weeks working up in Scotland, maybe a few weeks beforehand, and they would be working with someone that you knew, or almost a little bit like the army. You know, it's quite a small hub, really.
Well, you got plenty of business, Rob. Since there's not many folks in there, you got plenty of business. Is that right?
That's true. Yes, yeah, definitely.
Well, I can only imagine having that. Again, back to your initial story there about, you know, working on that home that dated back to, sounds like the early 18th century, and holding these stones that hadn't been held by human hands in 300 years. I mean, gosh, the epiphanies you're having day in and day out as you work on these old properties, that's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, but very and very rewarding. You know, just sort of holding that piece of stone. I know it's just a piece of stone, but just knowing that a guy put it in, you know, 250, 300 years ago, and here you are just removing it, you know,
Right.
and the building's still there. You know, the building's still being used as a home or you know, an office.
Love it.
I mean, these properties, these aren't going to be here in 300
Right.
years' time. These will probably be knocked down in maybe 40 years' time, and then something else will be built.
Right. It is fascinating. All right. So, speaking, I gotta throw this in, because what you just shared there reminds me of a really thought-provoking movie, and I think the name of it is just Ghost. It is. I'm gonna have to put the.
Ghost.
No, not that Ghost. Not that Ghost. This movie was released just a couple of years ago, and it follows this guy that passes, and then he's kind of a ghost until he gets his final disposition. And to your point, Rob, he kind of lives in this one property, and the movie kind of follows the arc of what happens to that property, and you don't even think about how, you know, in 40 or 50 years, to your point, how a lot of these properties are going to change, and then certainly over the course, you know, of 200 or 300 years. And there's a moment in that movie where it really illustrates the point you just made. So I'm gonna have to track down that movie title and the big actor that was in it. Ghost, I want to say, but anyway, Ghost Stories or Ghost Tales or something. But I'll think of it. I'll put it in the show notes. So on that note, let's make sure folks know. So Rob, you kind of operate under the radar a little bit. We usually invite our listeners to connect, but hey, different strokes, different folks. But for folks that may want to learn more from Rob, Dan, we're going to promote you to agent for one, Rob Chell. So how can folks connect with you, Dan, whether it's about Esker or whether it's about your experiences in the British Army, or if it's about, hey, give me some more information on Rob Chell. How can folks connect with you, Dan?
That's right. I mean, if you have a very old property that needs some work, you know, it won't be cheap. Right. Maybe I should take the cut of this as the middleman, but you can reach me at daniel.reeve@esker.com. Find me on LinkedIn at Esker.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
It's just that easy. Well, hey, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I love that y'all spoke about your time together in uniform. Really appreciate that. Rob, we look forward to having you back soon. I want to get some snapshots of some of your construction sites, Rob. That's got to be pretty cool.
Sorry, say that again.
That said, I want to I want to get some video tours of these construction sites, these homes that were built back in the 1700s and whatnot. That's gonna be really cool.
I'll look out an old video camera of mine and take some videos for you.
Awesome. Hey, Dan, thanks so much for your time. We've been chatting with Dan Reeve with Esker, also a veteran of the Royal Army. Hey, folks, hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Folks, make sure you can check out vets2industry.org, our big nonprofit partners over there. They're doing great work for the veterans community. On behalf of our entire team here at Veteran Voices, Scott Luton wishing all of our listeners nothing but the best. Hey, challenge you to do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And on that note, we'll see you next time right back here on Veteran Voices. Thanks, everybody.